All right. Hey, everybody. And I have to change it back to gallery for me because I want to look at you all. So happy today, whatever today is. It's good to see you. I promised that tonight I would get to the questions because now I have 2 pages of questions. So I am going to do that. But I also want to give you guys, if you choose to accept it, because of course you're free agents, you can do whatever you want. But I'd like to give you guys an assignment, something I'd like you to do between now and next week so that we can talk about it next week. Let me share my screen. So this is the Awakening Together YouTube channel. And you can find the Awakening Together YouTube channel by just going, to YouTube and typing in Awakening Together YouTube channel, right? It's pretty easy to find. And when you get to the Awakening Together YouTube channel, if you go to the playlists, one of the playlists, let's see, where did it go? It used to be right here at the top. Things have moved around. That's interesting. Where did the RDA early teachings go? They're gone. They should be here somewhere. Let's see, sort by date added. Says we are sorted by, there it is. I don't know where it went, but there it is now. So if you go to the RDA, and notice, by the way, if you have trouble, do what I did, sort by date added. And if you go to the RDA early teachings and click on view full playlist, and then scroll down. Boy, there's a lot of these. Right here. It looks like it's starting with video 103. You'll notice there's the levels of consciousness, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5. I'd love for y'all to watch these. And you'll notice they're not very long. The first one is 4.5 minutes. The second one is the longest. It's 11.5. And then we have 9 minutes, 6 minutes, and 9 minutes. So it won't take a real long time to watch them. But if you would watch these and this week, the next week, what I want to do is I want to talk about these levels of consciousness, which are a little different than the 4 principles of God. I want to talk about it with the 4 principles of God. I want to show you how they fit together, because I think that will help to bring even more clarity. And of course, we're here to clarify the teachings. So again, the RDA Early Teachings playlist on the Awakening Together channel. And then you're looking at videos 103 through 107, the levels of consciousness. Okay. All right. Then what I'm going to do is look at the questions and start answering the questions. The first question just came in this week, but it's pretty timely. So I thought that I would go ahead and answer it first. Here's the question. I know the importance of believing attention, right? Because believing attention, when we give a believing attention to something, because we are consciousness, that something gets created in the world. And again, I'm not using the word created here like a Course in Miracles. Course in Miracles maybe would use the word make. But it gets created in the world in some way. That energy that we give believing attention to shows up in the world. So that's what she means when she says, I know the importance of believing attention. So she says, I know the importance of believing attention. When it comes to war, as in the Ukraine, what do I do with my believing attention? Please teach me how to use my believing attention effectively. That's a super question, because, there's always something in the news. Doesn't matter what the current event is. There's always going to be something, when the war in Ukraine passes, something else will show up. So regardless of what it is that we're talking about, it's wonderful to know what to do with our believing attention. One obvious mistake, I'm actually just getting out the silly putty to play with it. I'm not going to do anything with it, but play. One obvious mistake is getting all upset, all hot and bothered, all worried, all, where you're so involved that you have to watch the news all the time and see what's going on. That's the kind of believing attention that is creating more appearances like the one that you're watching. So when you get all caught up in whatever's going on, you're giving a believing attention to that energy, and more manifestations are going to be created. So that one, I think you guys are clear on. But another mistake, which spiritual people sometimes make, the other mistake is to try and somehow put your attention on, I'm going to call it pushing that presence away. Like sometimes, everybody will say, oh, let's all get together at, 8 o'clock, GMT time, and let's all spend 8 minutes envisioning the war in Ukraine ending, something like that, right? When you do that kind of thing, that's what in the Tao Te Ching is really, it's not called this in the Tao, but people that understand the Tao know this is what the Tao is talking about. This is what is called pushing the pendulum. When you have a pendulum, I guess I do get to use my silly putty. When you have a pendulum and, you think there's a bad appearance that you want to heal. And notice I say, you think there's a bad appearance that you want to heal. And of course, isn't that why we're getting together at 8 p.m. GMT to all sit here and close our eyes and wish the war away, right? We think it's bad. If we didn't think it was bad, would we bother to do that? No, of course not. So we're all getting together trying to push away this bad appearance. And what happens is that's like pushing a pendulum. What happens when you let go of a pendulum? It goes right back the other way, right? So that's actually just another form of the same thing. It's another form of putting believing energy on that thing, even though you may be, quote, well-intentioned. You have judged it as bad. You have judged that it shouldn't be here. You are trying to get rid of it in a spiritual way. It's the same thing. And it also extends that energy in the world. So there's really two things that you can do to be helpful. And I'm guessing that's what you really want, right? What you really want is to be truly helpful. So there's two things that you can do to be truly helpful with any appearance. It doesn't even have to be on the news. With any appearance that you judge as bad, that you think shouldn't be there, that's upsetting to you, right? Any appearance at all. The first thing is, if you are upset to any degree, you look within yourself and you find what's in you that's upset by this. What belief, what conditioning, what value, what judgment. Although these aren't very pretty words, what we're actually doing on the spiritual path in a very gentle way, the words aren't gentle, but we're doing this in a very gentle way, is we're killing the ego. That's what the spiritual path is about. You're very, very slowly killing the ego. And the way you do that is by taking the wind out of it. And the wind, or the breath of the ego, is again your believing attention. So what you want to find in you is what you are believing now, what you are giving believing attention to, or value to is another way to say it, that's causing you to be upset about this appearance. And you want to surrender that, let go of that. Because as you let go of that, you're letting go of the ego in you. And letting go of the ego in you is the most helpful thing you can do ever, right? At all times. So, for example, I wish I remembered every story from my past, but I just don't. I only remember some. So I apologize for always telling the same stories over and over. I can only use the ones I remember. I know I've done this multiple times, but I remember this particular story because it was more dramatic. And this is when ISIS was in the news. And there was this Jordanian pilot who was flying over ISIS-held territory and had some kind of a malfunction. And he had to eject from his fighter plane, right? And he came down in ISIS territory and they captured him. And then what they did was they put him in a cage. They poured gasoline or some other type of fuel all over him. And they lit him on fire. And they stood around, there were even children present, and watched this man be burnt alive. And when I caught that on the news, my heart was just incredibly broken. I was incredibly upset. I started really just crying and crying and crying. And one thing I want to tell you that's really funny and important to know is that the spiritual ego, which is still the ego, but it uses spiritual teachings to try and keep you in ego, to keep you believing ego. The spiritual ego was telling me I should be able to be at peace with this, but I wasn't at peace with this, right? Telling myself that I should be at peace is not healing. So what I had to do is, first of all, I had to accept my feelings, not try and change them, is what we mean by accept, right? I had to accept my feelings. I had to accept my broken heart. I had to accept how I was crying. I had to allow that crying, and it lasted, the way I remember now, around 2 hours. I mean, it wasn't short. It lasted a little bit of time. But I also had to look in me to find out what's upset here, what's crying. And what I found in me that was upset and that was crying that day was this idea that people shouldn't be that inhumane, like they crossed a line, right? People are inhumane with one another all the time, but people shouldn't be that inhumane. I had a line there. And then what I had to do was I had to let go of that line. I had to give permission for people to be however they were going to be. And I had to promise to love them no matter what. That was the day that, the reason I remember this is because that was the day that I made a commitment to loving everyone no matter what. Didn't matter what they do. It didn't matter if they go invade another country, if they torture other people, if they abuse children or puppies or anything. That was the day that I took away the line. Like, I'll love you if you stay on this side of the line. If you go on that side of the line, I can't love you anymore. And that's called letting go of ego. Because ego can't take away the line. Ego has to have a line. It can maybe move the line, but it can't take away the line. Yeah, I see a question, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm just so that's awesome. And I would love to do that. And I realize I go through all these steps and I realize I'm not there spiritually for sure, but I totally get it. So is it just kind of like fake it till you make it? So in other words, I'm not upset emotionally when I think of Trump or with anything I dislike anymore, or this war with Ukraine. I'm impressed with the leadership, with the people. I'm and I'm very hopeful. I see the amount of people and people when judgment comes into our house, I'm just like, that's not going to help anything, so let's not do it. So I'm good at I've been really good at practicing neutrality, but I can see where you're coming from. And in that line, let's say I'm not okay, when that happens, is it just okay, just not be okay, and then one day when it's ready, it'll go?
Yeah. First of all, the first step is always be honest about how you're feeling. So in that way, I want to say it's not fake it till you make it, right?
Right.
It's always be honest about how you're feeling. Always do your best to look and see if you can see, what's going on with you, right? One of the best ways not to heal or not to let go of the ego is to put the blame out there on someone or something else. You always want to take responsibility for how you're seen and how you're feeling. So if you can notice what's going on with you, that's wonderful. And then if you can't let go of it right then, you give your willingness to let go of it. That's what you do, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what you do. You just say, I am willing. I see here. In fact, I remember so many times saying, one of the hardest things to let go of for me was self-hatred or the belief in my own inherent unworthiness. That was one of the hardest things to let go of. And every time I saw it again, every time I realized the reason I'm upset is because this person has said something that's triggered my unworthiness. The real reason I'm upset is because I think I'm a loser, right? And then I couldn't just let go of it because this was such a deep belief. So all I would do is here's what I would say. I would say, I see this belief. Oh my God, I do believe it. I can't even imagine that I'm not the lowliest person on the planet. I mean, it seems like a fact to me, but I am willing to see that I'm wrong. That's what I did with it. And eventually that belief died. So you just be honest and you give your willingness. That's what you do. Right? So again, thank you for asking that question. This is a great way to use your energy when anything is upsetting to you. I don't care if it's in the news. I don't care if it's in your spouse. I don't care if it's the weather. Believe it or not, being hot or cold is not actually a reason for being upset. It might be a reason for getting a drink of water, or it might be a reason for adding another layer, but it's not a reason for being upset. Anytime you're upset, this is the way that you have something to let go of. This is the way that you have an opportunity here. And again, some things you can let go of easily. Some things you'll give your willingness over and over and over again, possibly for years, but eventually it will work, right? So that's one of the things that you can do. Again, I said there were two things you could do. The other thing is a little more advanced, but at some point you're going to be ready for it if you're not now. So I might as well tell you the advanced thing. The advanced thing is just be the peace that you are. Just be that with whatever your eyes are landing on. Stay there. There comes a point when the peace that you are is such a strong center that you can just shift your attention to it at any time, any moment, and just abide as that. Right? Just be that. So if you can, again, in an honest and genuine way, shift to the peace that you are and just be that, that's the most helpful thing you can do. If you can't do that, then letting go of whatever in you is in the way of being able to know the peace that you are, right? you want to give your attention to letting go of that. So you either be the presence of peace or love or whatever you want to call it. You either be the presence of peace or do your best to locate the obstacle. It's not allowing you to be that. That's my answer to that first question. All right, are we good with that? Should I go to the next question? Okay. Oops, I opened up the wrong document. Let me get the right document. Question number 2. It says Inca is asking for some clarification of the flow between the second and third principle. Is Inca here? Yes, Inca. Do you want to ask that question directly so that I have a real clear understanding of the question?
I don't remember the question.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will do my best to answer the question. I think the discussion we're going to have next week may be really a helpful addition to this, but let me do my best. At the level of second principle, a lot of people have a misunderstanding that the only thing at the level of second principle is God energy. At the level of second principle, there's also ego energy. So it's almost like, well, I know a story I can tell you. Let's go into a children's story. Actually, it's in NTI, but I still perceive it as a children's story. NTI Romans chapter 2, for those of you who have read it or those of you who want to read it after I tell the story. NTI Romans chapter 2 talks about when what we are had this curious idea, which A Course in Miracles calls the tiny mad idea. This curious idea, what would it be like if everything were different than it is? In other words, what would it be like if I wasn't this, but I was something else and there were other things, right? What would it be like if everything was different than it is? And it says, as soon as that question was asked, 2 options were born. One option said, everything is as it is, and that's the only truth. That option, of course, is in consciousness. The other option was, ooh, everything just changed. It's not what it used to be anymore. There's another reality now. That option is also in consciousness. Those of you who know Michael Langford, he refers to them as option A and option B. So in consciousness, we actually have 2 options, one of which A Course in Miracles would call Holy Spirit, and one of which A Course in Miracles would call ego. So the flow between the second and third principle of God, the primary flow going from the second into the third principle of God is the ego energy. All right. And the reason for that is that's the energy that's interested in the world. That's the energy that says another reality has been created. That's the energy that says something else is real. So it's paying a lot of attention in that direction. So that's the primary energy that goes from the second principle to the third principle, and then it shows up as manifestation in the fourth principle. But it's not the only energy. The other energy, of course, is the one that points to truth, which right now I'll just call Holy Spirit. Now that energy also works its way through the third principle of God from the second principle to the third principle and shows up in manifestation. Often when it shows up in manifestation, one of the words we give it is grace. But that really shows up in a couple of different ways. One is that when because remember, we are consciousness, we really are at that second principle level, no matter where we think we are, right? When we focus our attention, especially in a devotional, contemplative, or meditative way, when we focus our attention towards truth, that is the second principle, focusing from the truth energy through the third principle and it will manifest in the world in some way. Right? So focusing, so like, when I sit in devotion in the morning, or when you sit in devotion in the morning and you're contemplating whatever you're contemplating, and, you feel your heart opening up, and, all that wonderful stuff that happens during that devotional period, that is the second principle of God, focusing through the third principle, and it will create some type of right-minded manifestation in the world. This is why, for example, sometimes people walk through a bookstore and A Course in Miracles falls off the shelf and hits them on the head. This type of energy, right? The other thing, of course, is when you focus on, like awareness, watching awareness meditation, or loving consciousness meditation, and you are turning your attention back towards consciousness, that creates an opening for what the Tao Te Ching might call, or for at least Regina, when she teaches the Tao Te Ching, for a corrective energy to come into the universe and to create some kind of grace, right? So by focusing on, the thoughts of the right mind and contemplating them and embracing them, or by focusing on the true self, consciousness, to the best of your ability, those two things allow the truth energy, the energy that points toward truth, to pass through the third principle into manifestation. So those are the two flows. Of course, at this time, the primary flow is, of course, still the egoic energy. The good news is the truth energy is much, much, much stronger. So it doesn't take as many people focusing on the truth energy to really overcome a lot of egoic energy, right? It's a stronger energy because it's true, right? It's a truth energy. Yes, Jim.
And I had an experience today earlier that kind of speaks to both the things I think that you've been talking about. And I was just sitting quietly. I wasn't meditating, but a thought of someone who I had a past grievance with came into my mind. And without thought or without effort, I experienced that energy of the grievance, and then I experienced the energy of no grievance, of love.
Yes.
And there was a subtle, believe it or not, it was a subtle difference between the two, and I went to love.
Yes.
Well,
and
it was automatic. It wasn't thought, so.
Well, but that's evidence right there. That's evidence that both of these energies are in consciousness. That's why they can both be in you.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's, so perfect. Thank you for sharing that.
No, thanks.
All right. So Inka, I don't know if that was your question or not, but that's my answer. Is that good?
It's very good. It was exactly my question. And the only addition, or where I just want to confirm that, so when the person dies and makes the transition, the person at the end of your silly putty,
Yeah.
it goes back, that attention, that third principle of God then comes back into the whole.
The energy that is life.
Yes.
Yes, it that never dies. Right.
And it goes back.
Well, I can't say that I can't say that that's always true. I can't say that I know that for sure. But I will say that in some way it continues. To say that it would go back into consciousness and get back absorbed into consciousness, I can't say that I know that for sure. I think it certainly can happen that way, but it might have another way of immediately going into another manifestation too. So I don't like to guess on stuff, right? So.
Right. And yeah, I just understood when you talked at some point that it goes back into the general, but I can see what you're saying today.
Yeah, that was really a symbol. Yeah, that was a symbol. I know what you're talking about. What I was trying to show with that particular symbol was that there isn't really such a thing as an individual soul, which a lot of people believe in, that there are, however, imprints, and the imprints that are still with us as, quote, people, when we die, those imprints remain in consciousness, and those imprints manifest again in some way. But it's not a soul that continues like some people believe. Okay, yeah. All right, let me go to the next question then. Where does unity consciousness fit in the fourth principle? The fourth principle, of course, is simply manifestation. I mean, that's really what it is. But the way unity consciousness, quote, fits in the fourth principle is that as you begin to awaken to the truth of what you are, you see that in the world. And again, I'm sure I've told this story before, but I remember, well, really the first two times it kind of happened to me. The first time it happened, and these were just little glimpses before anything became more regular, but still, because they were so dramatically different than the way I usually saw, they seemed like something big. The first one was back in 2008 or 2009, when I was practicing the I am that I am mantra on a regular basis. I had been assigned to practice that mantra from Inner Ramana. And I was practicing that mantra. And every day I used to go next door and get their dog and bring it to our house to play, because they just kept it in a little pen, and they gave me permission to go get it and bring it to my house every day. So I would do that. And I was just walking across the grass going to pick up this dog. And all of a sudden I had my first recognition of my true self, genuine, real, not thought, knowing it, right? And I remember my reaction to it was, that's the something real that can't be affected. Because I knew that line from A Course in Miracles. I went, that's what it is, and I knew that it was me. That was my first experience of consciousness, but yet, here I was still a person walking next door, right? I mean, this experience occurred within what appears to be the fourth principle of God. My second experience was seeing it outside of me, because see, that was seeing it in me, right? Realizing I was that. My second experience was seeing it outside of me. And this is when I was walking my dog one day, and I looked down and I saw a bug. But before my mind, you know how fast your mind identifies a bug as a bug? It seems instantaneously, but it actually isn't. Because before my mind could identify the bug as a bug, I was consciousness seeing consciousness, the same. And then my mind came in and said, bug, and I just thought that was so funny. And these were just the first two glimpses. And again, as I continued to practice the spiritual practices that I was guided to practice, the sensation that I had, and some people have this very quickly, I just had it slowly. For me, it was a slow thing. But the sensation that I had was that, it was like consciousness somehow lived back here and was unrecognized, because I was focused on head and world. It's like consciousness began to come forward and take over. And what used to see the world and think about the world began to fade. So consciousness came forward, and, I suppose we could call it the ego, began to fade. And so as consciousness began to come forward, what I began to do is, not only recognize myself as consciousness, but recognize everyone and everything as consciousness. Right. And so again, at that level, you could say, there's still, there's still moving around here in the world. Right. I walk my dog, I cook dinner, I clean my house, I do my work, I talk to people, right? But the way of understanding what I am and what everything else is dramatically different. So that's kind of my answer to the question about how does was it the second principle? Hopefully I answered the right question. How does the second principle, how does unity consciousness fit in the fourth principle? And I'll tell you where the term unity consciousness, I believe I started using that term after reading Bernadette Roberts. I was like, oh, I like that term. I started using it, borrowed it. But what unity consciousness is knowing what you are and knowing what everything else is as the same thing. Right? That's what unity consciousness is. And I've been having a lot of fun lately because I've been reading, this year, for some reason, I'm reading all, at least so far this year, I'm reading all Catholic authors. And one thing that's really fun is I'm reading these Catholic authors. Of course, I'm reading the mystics, And one of the things that's really fun is watching these people in their writings discover, because, they're taught one thing as Catholics, but then because they're following the mystic path, they're beginning to see God in everything, where they, and it's just fun to watch them wake up to this unity consciousness and realize, oh my gosh, God isn't somebody, some divine somebody up in the sky judging us. God is everything. I mean, and some of these mystics are writing, even the greatest sinners in the world are God. They're writing their little writings, probably hoping nobody's going to find their writings and hang them later or burn them at the stake or anything. But, this is what happens. It happens to anyone who truly goes within in sincerity with the desire to discover truth. And so you can see it right here. Again, Jesus would say the kingdom of heaven is at hand. At hand means here, now, right? You don't have to go anywhere. So that's my answer to that question. All right, so the next question then. This person has a question about awareness, watching awareness meditation. It said it watched Leo Gura's self-inquiry video. The way I interpreted his description was that consciousness was watching the first principle of God. For some reason, I had always thought of it in meditation more like the first principle, observing the second principle. And so I guess the question is, which way is the watching going? The watching is always going back, towards the first principle. It doesn't hit the first principle right away, unless you're, Superman or Superwoman. It doesn't hit the first principle right away, but it's going from where you're probably sitting, which is at the fourth principle, from who you think you are is what I mean by that, right? You probably think you're a person sitting down to meditate. That would be fourth principle thought. So it's going from the fourth principle, always back towards the first. So that's the answer. And, Nisargadatta Maharaj is a great teacher of this, because Nisargadatta Maharaj teaches that first, and of course he doesn't use my language, fourth principle and all of that, but first, you're sitting down as a person. That's who you think you are. You're sitting down as a person and you're focusing on consciousness. And you keep focusing on consciousness. You keep focusing on consciousness until you awaken or realize that you are consciousness. But then he says you don't stop there. You keep focusing on consciousness. You keep focusing back on consciousness as much as you can. And eventually, he says, that takes you back prior to consciousness entirely, which would be the first principle of God. So no matter where you are, you're focusing, you're trying to see a consciousness that, I don't know what word to use, that is more or deeper or beyond, right? Beyond what you have realized already. So hopefully that answers that question. So yeah, it is focusing from the fourth towards the first. Okay, the next question. Talking about happiness, peace, and joy, you define those states of beingness without judgment. So I must have said this. I defined happiness, peace, and joy as of states of beingness without judgment. And you called them real. Are they real with a capital R, therefore first principle? Or to which state does beingness belong? And what is the relation between being and experiencing, if there is any? Boy, what a question. Well, first of all, I got to tell you all that I have not awakened to the first principle of God. So I can only talk about the first principle of God in very limited ways, in ways that, that I have had the opportunity to realize in these little glimpses. Primarily, well, I'll just tell you the truth as best as I can. I have begun to have experiences. I remember Nisargadatta Maharaj talked about the holes in the net. He has a quote where he talks about the holes in the net. And I used to think, what in the world is he talking about? And I've heard different people say what they thought he was talking about. And I'm like, I don't think that's it. I didn't know what he was talking about, but my intuition would say that what they were saying wasn't it. Well, I have begun to experience the holes in the net. You remember I told you about my Big Bang experience, that the world is coming and going and coming and going and coming and going and coming and going, right? And of course, if you can imagine that in real slow motion for a moment, when the world comes, it's coming through consciousness, through the third principle into manifestation. When the world goes, it goes all the way out, back to the fourth principle. So in those gaps that we can't see in between, you're in the first principle. It goes back out to the first principle, right? Those little gaps. Well, I'm starting to sense those gaps. But the way that I sense those gaps is as if everything, like a gap, like everything isn't there, including me. Like a gap, which to me sounds like a hole in the net, like a gap. I also have had some experiences, one primary experience of, it was kind of like being here one moment, and then all of a sudden it was 25 minutes later, and not knowing what happened in between, just boom, boom, like that, like boom, boom, right? And so there's no memory of what happened in between. There's no awareness of what happened in between. And somebody asked a question on YouTube, something about, is the first principle of God like being asleep at night, when you're unconscious? And these little experiences would almost point to as if that is true. However, that is not what the masters say. So I've had this question in my mind the last 3 or 4 months since I've begun to have these experiences. I've had this question in my mind. So what's the difference between these experiences where there's just nothing? There's not even an awareness of nothing. There's nothing, right? And then there's something again, right? What's the difference between that and what the masters are talking about this awareness of it? Well, I got the answer this morning. And the answer was that when the self is still too far away from being ready, fully ready to die, that the memory of the word that was used in this case was ecstasy, the memory of the ecstasy of the first principle, the awareness of the ecstasy of the first principle, it's covered up by the self. So there's this experience of, like I said, 1 minute it's, 6:15, and the next minute it's 7:05. What happened? And that's just because the self is not ready yet. It's not ready yet. So that's all I can tell you, because that's where I'm at. I can't talk to you about beyond my experience. So when you ask questions about the first principle of God, one thing I am never going to do is make stuff up. You know, that's what we do, by the way. That's what the ego does. It's really kind of funny. The ego makes stuff up and believes it, right? All the time. It just makes it up and then it believes it. So, you know, you can't really call it lying because you think what you're saying is true. What you missed was the fact that you made it up. And I'm not going to do that. So a lot of questions about the first principle of God, you're going to get a great big giant, I don't know, except for the few little tiny glimpses that I know are truth. You know, like I know that the first principle of God is beyond consciousness. I know that the first principle of God is the seed or the source of everything. I know that the first principle of God is beyond anything that we can imagine. Now, when you talk about beingness, what is beingness? That, you know, I suppose that would be dependent on how a person defined a word. See, this is the problem about words. Words can be defined in different ways. But I'll tell you what is in the second principle of God that is not in the first principle of God. What is in the second principle of God that is not in the first principle of God is the sense of I am. So if you call I am beingness, if that's what you mean by the word beingness, then there's no beingness in the first principle of God defined that way, right? Even the word existence, some people equate existence to the I am. And so you'll hear those people say there's no existence in the absolute, but that's because they're equating existence to the I am. But at the same, most definitely, in a seed, the life is in the seed. Otherwise, it could not grow to be anything else. So in another way, there is life, there is existence, there is beingness, but it's not in the sense of I am. One word that I was given and that I have always perceived to be one of the best words for the first principle of God because it was given to me from inner wisdom is simply the word is, right? Without anything else, is. That's the word I was given for the first principle. Okay, so there's no I am in the first principle, but it is, right? Is, that word fits. So it depends on what you mean by beingness. If beingness equals is, then you could say, yes, there's beingness in the first principle. If beingness equals I am, then there is no beingness in the first principle. If beingness equals manifestation, there certainly is no beingness in the first principle, although the first principle is in all manifestation. So that's the best I can answer that question. Okay, love is spirit giving to spirit, through spirit, that which spirit requests. Can you say something about this in reference to the four principles? Is spirit giving the second principle, through spirit, the third principle, to spirit, the fourth principle, and where is spirit requests located? When I was given that statement from within, love is giving to spirit, through spirit, that which spirit requests. My understanding of that, even though I didn't have the word third principle yet, my understanding of that was the interaction of the third and fourth principles. You know, that, now, of course, you could also say that somehow consciousness is in there too, because that's what we are. But at that time, I wasn't even aware of consciousness. I was only aware of myself as a person. So this is the level that I was being taught at, right? And so being taught from the fourth principle, I was looking up to the third principle. And that's the level that teaching occurred at. As I mentioned to you all, in my process of awakening, I have been awakening up through the levels. So my first experience was, I'm a person, I'm Regina, blah, 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 from Coffeyville, Kansas, blah, 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 right? My second experience of myself was, the word I used then was as a creator. You'll hear a lot of old teachings where there's a lot of emphasis on creator. That is when I had realized myself and everyone, not me alone, of course, when I had realized us as the third principle. And the only two principles I was aware of at that time were the third and the fourth. In fact, at that time, I would have mistaken the third principle of God for the totality of God. That's all I knew. And then that day when I was practicing that I am mantra and walking across the grass and became aware of consciousness for the first time, that's the first time I was ever aware of consciousness. In fact, again, notice the words I use when that experience happened. That's the something real that can't be affected. I didn't even have a name for it, right? That's the something real that can't be affected. I suddenly knew it. Didn't even have a name for it. That was the first time I became aware of something beyond the third principle. Up until that point, all of my teachings are about the third principle, because that was the ultimate to me. That's all I knew. And then somewhere around 2008 or 2009, I think it might have been 2008. I was actually given the I am that I am mantra almost a year, 9 months before Inner Ramana started coming. And that's why if you read Inner Ramana, it says something, let me see, I have it right here. It's kind of funny. If you read Inner Ramana and you get to the message about the mantra, ooh, I'm running out of time. It says in it, I suppose it's not important, but it says in it, there's this whole thing called instructions for using the mantra. It came on February 17th, 2009. I was actually given the mantra in April of 2008. So it has this whole thing that says instructions for using the mantra. It never mentions what the mantra is. And then at the very bottom of the page, it says the mantra is I am that I am. I added that to the message because, see, I'd had the mantra for a year. I knew what this was talking about, but nobody else would know because I received the mantra in April of 2008. I'd already been doing the mantra for nearly a year by the time Inner Ramana showed up, but it was just a continuation of what I had received in April of 2008. So my first experience of consciousness, I think, probably came somewhere in the late spring or early summer of 2008 when I was walking across to get Zeke. Up until that moment, I was only aware of the fourth and third principles. I became aware of the first principle of God, and I think it was probably May of 2012. That's when I had my first little into it. And again, it was just like the experiences I'm having now. It was just a nothing, and yet I knew exactly what it was. Isn't that amazing? You often hear people describe it as a non-experience. I think that's a perfect way to describe it, because how can that be an experience? So when this statement came, love is giving to spirit, through spirit, that which spirit requests, that was really, from my perspective at the time, talking about how I and everyone else as creator, as what I would call third principle of God, manifest this world. And how it's where I did learn about believing attention, giving believing attention, and as a result, manifesting the world. But I saw that then as the third principle of God, even though I didn't have those words yet. So, and then the question is about experiencing. And what is the relation between, oh no, that was the previous question I didn't answer. Experiencing to me is primarily, not entirely, primarily ego. Definitely, it only belongs to the I am. There has to be an I am to have experience. But the reason I say primarily the ego is because the I am doesn't have near as many experiences as the ego. I mean, compared to the ego, you would say the I am is not experiencing, but it actually still is. It's just much more subtle, much more empty, right? The majority of what we call experience is ego. Okay. 4 minutes. See what this next question is. P.S. While contemplating was ongoing, one of my urging questions popped in, which refers to the difference between being and experiencing. Oh, must be the same person. So I just answered that. When we do dyads, we may state, I set the intention to have a direct experience of the truth of who I really am. Oh, okay. The words direct experience and experience don't mean the same thing. Isn't that funny? The words direct experience and experience don't mean the same thing. It always sucks that we're limited to the words that we have. A direct experience, those words really mean know, hear directly. So for example, I described my experiences with the first principle right now as non-experiences, but that's also a direct experience. You know, you are not having a direct experience. I'm telling you about it. And it's going through your mind and you're imagining whatever the heck you're imagining. I had a direct experience, but it was not an experience, you see? So direct experience does not mean the same thing as experience, right? So when you say, I want to have a direct experience, you're not asking for an experience. You're asking for direct knowledge rather than learned knowledge or heard knowledge, right? So I'm sorry, it's the same word, but it is, and it means two different things. And that's just the way it goes. Let me see, 2 minutes left. She still has a little more in this paragraph. Let's look at it. I wonder if that means relative truth of the very, oh no, I think I answered that question. So I think we're good. So I'm going to delete all of those questions. And I will continue with the questions. That was nearly, oh good, now we're down to 1 page of questions. So we got 1 page of questions taken care of. What I want to do next week is I want to start by going over those levels of consciousness, parts 1 through 5, in relation to the 4th principles of God, because I think that will add more clarity. So, you know, go and watch those videos this week on the RDA Early Teachings playlist on the Awakening Together channel, the 5 parts of the levels of consciousness. I'll start with that next week. And then assuming we get through that, I'll return to the questions. Okay. Is this at all helpful to y'all? Okay, good. Because it's hard for me to, I can't tell from my perspective. So I'm happy if it is. All right. That's super. I'll see y'all later. Bye.